Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Moving on now to the matchup on Saturday night between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets, in which we saw the Timberwolves take game one and potentially shift the outcome of this series. If you look on DraftKings Sportsbook, it flipped the odds that now in favor of the Timberwolves. They are minus 125 to win the series as things currently stand as we record this. But definitely a standout performance in a handful of different ways. There was we'll start with Anthony Edwards, of course. He was the story of the game, especially coming out in the first half, and he was just unstoppable. He ends up scoring 43 points in this game, and it is interesting to sort of see, you get all of these different comparisons to Michael Jordan, to Kobe Bryant. Our boss here at the GSMC Sports Network, Andrew Tate, earlier we were talking about it, and he referred to him as a happy Kobe Bryant because he does have the play style, some of the demeanors of these players that draw the similarities, but the difference is he sort of does it he's still talking trash the entire game, and he wants to sort of put you on this, he wants to put you on the wrong end of a SportsCenter top 10 play every single second he's on the court, but he does so with a smile the entire time. And from he's still young, obviously, and we'll see how this sort of matures. He obviously has, parts in his game that he is going to be refining over time as well, but the fact that I talked about it on the show last week, the press conference that he had with Karl Anthony Towns, where he was sort of getting into him a little bit about picking up these stupid fouls, which has been a well-documented issue with Karl Anthony Towns, but he did so in a public setting, which typically isn't the type of move that is, that's a move that's typically frowned upon, but the fact that Edwards did it, he did it in an uplifting way, talking about the importance of Karl Anthony Towns on the team. This is why we need you to stop fouling. Now, stop effing fouling. And he was doing it with a smile on his face the whole time. So, I don't know. I guess a little bit of a body language and demeanor expert over here. I think I am, but it is, it's really encouraging to see his leadership style and the way that this entire Timberwolves team has bought into what he's selling. And now, again, we're having all these conversations about how great he is, and it is definitely justified. Do I think that there's a chance we could be going a little bit to the extreme already? Possibly, but at the same time, don't want to take away from the awesome experience we have right now of watching Edwards. And it was another instance of going up. It was another instance of him showing himself, and he did so by going into the arena of the defending champs, in a lot of people's eyes, the best team in the NBA, and dropping 40 plus on their head. And, it was just interesting to see on the other end where we look at Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as this, borderline elite perimeter defender, at least if you're sort of tuned into the NBA like that. He has been a tremendous perimeter defender, and Pope just had nothing really for him. Two Georgia guys going at one another, and this is another instance of Edwards has talked about his relationship with KCP, how he views him as an older brother, but he's not going to hold anything back this series, and that was definitely made clear from game one. So I'm not really sure what the defensive adjustment for the Nuggets is. Now, when you're looking at Edwards here, especially when he is sort of feeling himself from the three-point line, which he has been in these past couple games, then there's really not much you can do. In terms of, generally speaking, though, I'm not really sure what other looks. Now, it's going to have to be probably a Mike Malone scheme thing, because I don't know if there's any other player that they can just sort of stick on Edwards and have that be the answer. Now, Michael Porter Jr. is longer. He can sort of ramp up his defense when he needs to, but he's never been necessarily a shutdown perimeter guy. He is more so known for the offensive side of his game. Now, maybe that does sort of come out and we see MPJ play at this level we haven't before out of a level of desperation, but it is definitely going to be interesting to see how Mike Malone tries to counter this whole Edwards experiment. But other notes from the game, seemed like Jokic was at a level of discomfort that we typically don't see, and that's why Rudy Gobert, I still sort of go back and forth. I officially chose Wembanyama as my Defensive Player of the Year when we did our awards show here at the GSMC Sports Network. But, Rudy Gobert, if you vote in that direction, I thought it was the most, 50-50 call, and at least in recent history. And he continues to show how great he is. And Jokic still put up 32 points in this game. So, even when you're looking at a mediocre Jokic game, you're still looking at unbelievable stats. But he was having to settle out on the perimeter far more often than he prefers to. Setting up in the half court was a lot more difficult, so we saw the Nuggets try and push the pace maybe a little bit more than they prefer to. And when you're dealing with a Jamal Murray, who there is still definitely a question as to how healthy is he when he's dealing with that calf injury he was at the end of the Lakers series, that makes things tougher because Jokic can push himself, but that's not necessarily his game. He's more on the facilitation end, and when he needs to, he can do it himself, but especially when he's sort of, getting as physical as he is in the paint with a defender to the caliber of Rudy Gobert, it becomes much more difficult, and they're going to need the others around him to sort of take on more of a load, and just that bench continues to be a little bit of a concern for the Nuggets. I've talked about it on the show. I know that the Peyton Watson minutes and Christian Brown minutes, they do, look good in stretches, and I thought that especially when the Nuggets were making that push in the first half, that Reggie Jackson looked pretty solid, but it still doesn't feel like they have that impact guy, which sort of leads me back to the Timberwolves side of this, where I have to talk about Naz Reid because he went absolutely ballistic in the fourth quarter. It was 13 plus. He was just killing the Nuggets on the offensive end, and it was, really encouraging to see for them. It was an interesting conversation as to, do you even bring Towns back in when Naz Reid is doing what he is? Can't really run the triple big option, and Gobert, obviously, you need him to guard against Nikola Jokic, but that was such a huge plus for them to be able to help close out this game. Shows why, I didn't have him as sixth man of the year, but it's sort of hard to deny how incredible he is, and definitely was deserving of that award. But not just that, also Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I thought, maybe not necessarily in this game, but he's another sort of option that can come off of the bench that I think can be really impactful, more so than anybody on the Denver bench. And those non-Jokic minutes are typically where we see the Nuggets struggle, but even with some of the Jokic on the court minutes, the Timberwolves are just a defense that is constructed so well for helping to guard Jokic that things are going to get potentially a little bit dicey here. So as I mentioned, the Timberwolves, when you look on DraftKings, are now favored in this instance. I picked the Nuggets coming into the series. I'm not going to move off of that just because of game one, but on Friday when I laid out the way that the Timberwolves can sort of upset the Nuggets in this series, they played exactly to that way in this game. Doesn't really give anything for Jokic. Very good one-on-one defenders. Have the post presence with not just Gobert, but even having that second big that makes that sort of cheat code play of Aaron Gordon coming down the baseline and just sneaking behind the opposing defense, getting himself easy looks at the rim. That wasn't necessarily happening when that doesn't happen. It is not like Gordon is the most effective offensive player in the league because he can't really space it out for them. So I guess just, I can't move off of the Nuggets just yet, but if you were a believer in the Timberwolves for this series, that was the exact type of performance that you were sort of expecting as to why they would win. And I don't expect the Nuggets to definitely go down without a fight. So, going to be interesting to see, but especially if Jamal Murray is compromised, this is going to be a massive task. And if the Timberwolves end up winning this series, there is going to be tons. I mean, there already is a ton of love for Anthony Edwards, but this whole idea of, we've known for some time, I know that today on national TV, you're going to have tons of people who are just spewing about Anthony Edwards that maybe weren't as in tune with him, weren't following him quite as much during the past, I'd call it 2 seasons, because I really think he was coming into his own last year, headed into, he could have been on the brink of making an All-NBA team, but the Timberwolves weren't winning quite as much. He gets his first All-Star appearance, though, and it was clear that he was coming. The off-season stuff with Team USA and the fact that he absolutely took over that team during the past summer, and now here he is. He's going to be on an All-NBA team, first time of his career, and it's one of those situations where he's still very young. He's still, I believe, 22 years old, that you sort of think, okay, well, he's coming soon. He might already be arrived, and there's a chance that he is just so good that he's able to help elevate the Timberwolves over the Nuggets just off of his pure level of stardom that is maybe, past what most people expected. And now, again, I know that there are going to be people that are sort of on the other side of the spectrum on this, because we are in such an overreaction culture here, and because a lot of people probably feel like they have to compensate a little bit for the fact that they weren't talking enough about Anthony Edwards headed into this type of a playoff series. But to go into the reigning national champs home arena and put on that type of performance, this might just be a statement that there's no more he's on his way. He may already be here for the time to be. I feel like selfishly here, quickly from a Celtics fan perspective, I would love to see him and Jason Tatum face off against one another in the finals. But, that is still definitely TBD. But we are going to, on the note of the Celtics, get into their second round preview against the Cleveland Cavaliers, as well as the other matchup in the Western Conference playoffs between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Dallas Mavericks, and I'm going to give my thoughts on those. So stick with us. We will be right back. Don't go anywhere.